Congressman Richard Hudson on how the GOP plans to advance gun legislation this time around. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also a CNN contributor and the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over and sign up for our free newsletter today if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with guns in America from a sane, sober perspective, focused on hard news reporting and analysis, pretty different from most of what else is out there. This week, we are going to be discussing the new Republican Congress coming in and some of the agenda that is in place for guns in this new Congress. And to do that, we have Rep. Richard Hudson with us, who is kind of one of the lead people in the Republican caucus on Second Amendment issues. So welcome to the show, Congressman. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you, Stephen.
And can you tell people just a little bit more about yourself for anyone who wants to hear more about your background?
Great. Well, Richard Hudson, I represent North Carolina's 9th District in Congress. RichardHudson.org is my website if you want to get more information. I've been in Congress. I'm starting my 7th term now, so it's been a little while. But I'm a lifelong proponent of Second Amendment rights. I can remember as a young boy reading my grandfather's NRA magazines and reading about how the Second Amendment is the amendment that allows us to protect all of our other rights. And so I've always had instilled in me this strong sense of appreciation for the Second Amendment. I'm also a lifelong hunter. You can see a few of my heads here behind me. My wife only lets me have one room at home for dead animals, so we've got a lot in the office here. But a lifelong hunter, enjoy the outdoors. That same grandfather, taught me to hunt and fish, and I have so many memories of being in the woods with him. And now I'm passing that along to my son, who's a 9-year-old. And he had his first deer hunt. Well, when he was shooting last hunting season, and had first duck hunts this year, and he loves as much as I do. So I enjoy being in the outdoors with my son and exercising those Second Amendment rights. But more importantly, as a legislator, I've really been focused on how do we protect those rights so that we can remain a free country. And so I have a long track record here in Congress of working on these issues. Probably the most important to me is the concealed carry reciprocity. And we were able to get it out of the House last time we had President Trump in the White House, but we weren't able to get it through the Senate. But I feel very optimistic now with the Republican Senate and President Trump coming back on Monday that we've got the best opportunity we've ever had to get this done.
Okay, yeah, and you've been one of the members of the House who's spearheaded some of these pro-gun bills that have been put up over the last decade or so, including perhaps most prominently, as you just mentioned, the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act. You have just introduced a new version of this year that does have a few changes. Can you walk us through some of the exactly what this new bill would do and what's different from some of the previous iterations?
Well, it's not a whole lot different. The basic premise is just like a driver's license. When I have a concealed carry permit issued by a state, when I travel to other states, they ought to recognize that is a legal permit. Still have to follow the rules of those states, just like a driver's license. You have to follow the speed limit, can't drive on the sidewalk. You have to follow all the laws of those states. But when I'm driving from North Carolina to D.C., I don't stop at the Virginia state line and take a Virginia driver's test and get a Virginia driver's license so I can proceed on my trip. In the same way with concealed carry reciprocity, if you're a law-abiding citizen who's not federally prohibited and your state is either a constitutional carry state or you have a permit from your state, then you ought to have that permit recognized when you cross that invisible state line. And so it's a simple premise. We've changed the title to Constitutional Concealed Carry Reciprocity because we want to drive home that point that if you're in a constitutional carry state, and frankly they all ought to be, then having that a state issued ID is enough when you go to other states to prove that you can carry concealed. Another change we made, though, was to define the term park, because I think it's really important that whether it's a federal park or some kind of federal land or a state park, you should not be prohibited from carrying in that park. And so that was one other change we made.
And there are a couple of language differences, I guess, between your version and what's been introduced in the Senate. Not a lot of major differences, but one of the areas that you mentioned here, and I think is going to be key, and that is shared among these two bills, is this idea of requiring that states recognize people from constitutional carry or permitless carry states and their ability to carry in every state. And so it's sort of making a permitless carry for people from permitless carry states everywhere in the country, right? That's my understanding what the text does. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. And I actually do like permitless carry. I think that's something you saw Governor DeSantis do in Florida. So you do have to have a government issued ID, and so that allows us to differentiate that citizen from an illegal alien or someone else with some nefarious purpose. And so, but either way, every other state ought to recognize it. Okay.
And so I guess the question there, two questions off of this. One, why not make it a federal standard for the whole country to be permitless? Why not go that extra step and just sort of, eliminate the various permitting systems that exist throughout the country and just have that same standard for everywhere?
Well, I mean, if I were emperor, there's a lot of things I would do differently. I think the Second Amendment is pretty clear. There shouldn't be restrictions on it. But I'm also dealing with the art of the possible. And so I think, a first step that I think is achievable is the reciprocity. So let's at least get it. Every other state recognize it. But I think, as you're seeing in a lot of states now, this is being something that the citizens are demanding, that's being determined that you can go permitless. And you don't see increases in crime. In many cases, you see a decrease in crime. You don't see all these horror stories that liberals try to tell to scare people out of or scare people into limiting our Second Amendment. There's a lot of things I'd love to see, but I think when you look at the art of the possible, I think reciprocity is the right place to start.
Okay, so and that was my other question: isn't allowing people from permitless carry states to carry in other states without a permit going to make it a bit harder to implement this, rather than just requiring that each state recognizes their permits? Are you concerned at all about even some of your Republican colleagues from states that have stricter permitting requirements objecting to that provision?
It's possible. That's obviously something we've got to weigh. But I think, most of the opposition to concealed carry reciprocity, when it's, honest, sincere opposition, comes from a lack of information. A lot of times when you're engaged in these debates, even when I'm being interviewed by reporters who aren't as smart and well-read as you, they ask these ridiculous questions like, well, what if a criminal from New York City goes to another state and gets a permit, and then they come back and then they can carry a weapon and commit a crime in New York? And it's like, all right, think through what you just said. A criminal in New York City doesn't care whether it's illegal to conceal the weapon that they're going to use in committing a crime. I mean, it's not logical. The people who particularly those who go through the process of getting a permit to conceal carry, but really the law-abiding citizens who are interested in this are not the ones I'm concerned about committing crimes. And the evidence proves it. In states where you see constitutional carry now as the law of the land, in a lot of cases you see crime go down, not go up. But the liberals who are opposed to this will say, oh, there'll be shootouts in the streets and it'll just be like mayhem, and it just doesn't happen that way. And so to me, when you're trying to convince folks to support this bill, or whether you're debating people on this topic, they're coming from an area of ignorance, and for me, it's important that you try to provide information to them and try to help educate them to understand what we're talking about. We're not. Any criminal who's going to do something bad with a firearm that's not deterred by the threat of being thrown in jail for the crime, that's not deterred by any of those consequences, is not going to think twice about committing the crime if it's illegal to put the gun in their coat before they commit it. So, I mean, it's just we're just talking about two different things. And so it's just a matter of educating people, to providing the information. I think, there is a fair argument that some make of, well, you ought to be trained if you're going to carry a firearm. You shouldn't have a bunch of people who don't know how to operate them walking around with them. And, it does make some common sense, but, we have a constitutional right in this country to carry firearms. We've been carrying firearms our entire history, and the law-abiding citizen, the parent who's trying to protect their family, those are not the people that are out there committing crimes and shooting up towns. And these things just aren't happening. And so it's, there's always a boogeyman that's created. But I think when you talk about hard facts and you talk about what's really happening in states, I think you can overcome those concerns.
And I guess the other half of that is it seems like there's a little bit of difference between your version of the bill and the Senate version on this point, which is, one of the major responses we've seen from, deeper blue states that want to continue to restrict gun carry in the wake of the Bruen decision from the Supreme Court in 2022 is this effort to expand gun-free zones, essentially, to really expand them quite a lot. And so getting the permit is not as much of an issue there anymore. It's where you can legally carry. And, your bill touches on this a little bit, but it still leaves most of that intact, right? Why not try to regulate that further from a federal point of view?
Yeah, I think, again, we're talking about the art of the possible. And, one big concern, even from conservatives on this, is, are you going to trample on states' rights? I believe Second Amendment is clear. I think you also look at Article 4, Section 1, full faith and credit clause, says that every state should recognize the proceedings and the papers of other states, and that the Congress may regulate how those are, or how that's handled. I'm paraphrasing it, but basically says there is a federal role to make sure that one state's recognizing the documents and the proceedings of the other states. And I think that's where you see a driver's license, is recognized in every other state. And I think it's the same thing for concealed carry, is that there is a federal role to say you must recognize those permits from the other states, or those privileges from the other states.
Is there any federal regulation in terms of the driver's license requiring states to recognize one another, or is that just not really as much of an issue, I guess?
My assumption is that just hadn't been an issue. I don't think there's a law that says you have to.
I see. But obviously with concealed carry licenses, there are a lot of states that don't recognize any other state's license. And so I guess for that reason, you think the federal government should get involved.
I do. And if you're thinking about states' rights, if a state decides they're going to have permitless carry, that's that state's right to do that. And other states shouldn't be able to add some gun training requirement on top of that. So again, I just think, constitutionally, you're on the clearest turf, the firmest ground, doing it the way we're doing it, which is, let the states have their own rules and regulations. But when it comes to federal lands, when it comes to parks, I think that's a place where it makes sense for the federal government to regulate. So that's where our bill steps in. I personally have been out to national parks with my family and have carried, for protection from two-legged animals and four-legged animals. If you're staying out in a campground somewhere, you don't want to be a victim of a robbery or something like that either. So I think the right to be able to carry and protect your family when you're on those federal lands is very important. And I think it's very appropriate for us to regulate that.
Okay. And you said part of this is obviously the art of the possible. It's going to be a very tight Congress. It is GOP controlled. President Trump will be in office, as you mentioned, on Monday here, I guess, when this goes public. But you're still going to have only 53 Republican senators. You're only going to have maybe a 1-vote margin in the House. What is your practical outlook on how far this bill can actually go?
Well, eventually we'll have a 3-vote margin. So once we get the special elections done, but you're right, it's very tight. Last time we passed this through the House, 2017, we had 3 Democrats vote with us. I've got 1 Democrat co-sponsor so far, so there is some hope that we'll get some crossover vote. And
have you seen any Democrats coming to you talking more about this in the wake of the election? Well,
one who asked to co-sponsor the bill, and so we've put him on. I haven't had an opportunity, frankly, to really work the room when we're voting and kind of work on getting some of those co-sponsors. But I plan to continue to have these conversations and try to get some folks to come over. But I do think there are a couple that that we could pick up. And, as far as the Republicans, I haven't had a conversation with everyone yet, but I would hope we would hold all the Republicans or certainly all but one or two. I need to go back and look, but I think we lost a couple last time as well. I know one of those, Peter King's, not in Congress anymore. But the margins are tight, but I do think it's something we're going to be able to get done. And particularly because President Trump campaigned on this issue, this is something that he supports. And so if I can get his help, which I think I will, then I think we can be successful. The Senate's a whole other animal. Last time around, we actually had a Republican majority in the Senate. And I couldn't get Senator McConnell to even give us a hearing. We've got a new leader in the Senate who's actually introduced gun legislation in the past. He's a strong Second Amendment proponent, and Senator John Thune. So I think he will help us. And yes, if we get all the Republicans, we still need 6 or 7 Democrats. And so we'll work on that. But I also think that's possible because you've got Democrats representing constitutional carry states even. And so I think there is the opportunity to do it. And again, President Trump's the key. If President Trump will lean in with me, I believe he will. I believe we're going to be successful.
Okay. And so obviously one of the other major pieces of legislation that you've championed in the past is the Hearing Protection Act, which would deregulate silencers, or at least delist them from the National Firearms Act, which includes a lot of extra regulations that people have to go through in order to obtain a suppressor or silencer. Do you anticipate introducing that again this year? Yes.
Representative Ben Cline from Virginia is going to introduce the bill soon. I haven't checked in with him this week, but he's going to be introducing it here early in the Congress. I'll be helping him push that. It's just common sense. The Firearms Act is designed for automatic machine guns, for bazookas and tanks. It's not for a device that makes a weapon more quiet. It goes like the UK. I'm told you can buy a suppressor in a hardware store off the shelf. These are not lethal objects. They don't make the gun more lethal. They just protect the hearing of the people around the gun when it's fired. It's something that we ought to encourage. We should want more people to use suppressors. Frankly, I've been working. I think the military. You look at special forces community; they all use suppressors. I'd like to see the entire military use suppressors to protect the hearing of our soldiers. I just think it's common sense. I think it's good policy. But people are scared because they don't understand. They call them silencers. They think that they make a weapon silent because of the movies. It's not the case. You'll take a semi-automatic rifle and reduce the sound down to the sound of a jackhammer. So it's not making a weapon silent. It's not making it more lethal. It's a simple common sense device that every parent ought to want their child to have. So I'm a big proponent of that. And hopefully this is the Congress we can bring that bill forward as well.
And do you see do you expect any sort of change of tactic or change in text in this bill? And in addition to that, how do you expect maybe the political effects of this recent assassination or murder of the United Healthcare CEO, where the suspect used a 3D printed suppressor in that? Do you see any fallout in Congress over that? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the biggest thing we need to do is do a better job of educating people about it. Jeff Duncan was the lead co-sponsor of this bill in past Congress, and I jokingly said to him, "You ought to just fire a pistol in the chamber, suppressed, and let people be scared by how loud it is." And I was joking, of course. You should not do that.
Yes, I hope so.
But I mean, people again, they think it's like the movies that you put that suppressor at the end of the muzzle, and all of a sudden it's silent. That's just not the case. It's still very loud. I remember when the Las Vegas shooting happened, you had gun control proponents, saying, I remember Gabby Gifford saying, think of how much worse this would have been if the rifle was suppressed. And she was doing a press conference at the Capitol. I went rushing over there. And by the time I got there, she was gone. But there was a couple of reporters. And I said, well, why didn't y'all ask her, how do you know it wasn't suppressed? And the reporter said, because I heard the bullet in the video. I said, you didn't hear the bullet. You heard the bullet breaking the sound barrier. So you couldn't have possibly heard that weapon discharge because it was so far away and it was inside the hotel room. And so you wouldn't have heard that sound even if it wasn't suppressed. I said, you guys need to do your research before you cover these stories, because people just don't understand what we're talking about. We're not making weapons more lethal. We're not making it so they're completely silent so that someone could commit an act of violence undetected. What you're doing is protecting the ears of, men and women who enjoy exercising their Second Amendment.
Yeah, and I mean, I imagine that's a bit of a hurdle. This getting the concept across of what a suppressor actually does. I mean, their inventor called them silencers, right? The ATF labels them that. But as you mentioned, and movies really do treat them quite a lot like they make gunshots silent. But in practice, that's not reality of the situation. But it's such a prevalent misunderstanding out there that I imagine this is an issue you run into when advocating for this bill, even within perhaps your own caucus. I don't know. What has your experience been on that?
That's right. Even Republicans, conservatives, have misconceptions about this. So it's a big piece of this will just be trying to educate folks. Again, your average semi-automatic rifle, we're talking about reducing it to about a 93 decibel sound, which again is the sound of a jackhammer. So, it's when people understand the facts, they're much more likely to support it and understand why it's important that we pass this legislation. I would say also, another concern is there's no time limit on the ATF approving suppressor applications. And things have actually gotten better recently in terms of the turnaround on that. But before the past year, I know it's taken people a long time, sometimes 18 months to get their suppressor application approved. That's just way too long. And so if we can't get the full Hearing Protection Act passed, I think putting some kind of shot clock on the ATF that you've got to approve these applications by a certain time period, I think we can come up with a reasonable time period. I think that's really important too.
Yeah, and speaking of that sort of reform, because obviously you've been trying to get these bills through for over a decade now, right? And it's just a very heavy lift with the numbers in Congress the way they are, even with a Republican-controlled Congress and a Republican in the White House who's who's on record supporting some of these things in the past. So, what's possible? What are some of the other? I know you believe that you can still get these bills through, and we'll obviously see how that goes. But there must be other, maybe smaller reforms or other strategies you could use beyond standalone bills as well to try and implement some pro-gun reforms. For instance, the one of the last things that Congress did, one of the last bills that President Biden signed, expanded access to federal gun ranges on federal land. It's requiring federal agencies to go out and find new areas to create public gun ranges. What do you see on that front? What are some of the things you're considering as other reforms beyond these more high profile efforts that we've been talking about for a long time? And what are some of the strategies you're planning to use to enact them?
Yeah, I think there are a number of other things that we're focused on, like debanking of gun manufacturers or retailers. We've seen payment process companies refuse to allow gun stores to use their product. We've seen some banks threaten to stop supporting gun manufacturers. These are all threats to our First Amendment rights. And something that we will be addressing. I think you'll see standalone legislation, but I think we'll be looking for opportunities to maybe offer amendments to bigger pieces of legislation where it may apply. Another area is with the shipping companies. There was a threat that one of the major shipping companies was going to stop shipping firearm components. That they after a few of us talked to them, they backed down on that. But keeping an eye on that situation. Looking at states imposing insurance requirements, user fees, other burdensome kind of red tape on folks to buy firearms. I think California is probably the worst actor in that category right now. But looking for ways to stop that kind of threat to our Second Amendment.
And what are some of the strategies you think? I mean, is any of this stuff something you could see being incorporated in perhaps one of these reconciliation bills, which are obviously paramount because they don't require that 60 vote threshold in the Senate, but they have to be about financial regulation, or they have to have some sort of significant financial effect to be able to get into reconciliation. I mean, something like even suppressor reform might fit in there. Have you guys looked through any of those sort of strategies? What are the, I guess, the strategies, the legislative strategies you're considering for some of these things?
Yeah, we're looking into that. It is tough because reconciliation means reconcile the budget. So it's got to actually have a significant financial impact, either positive or negative. It can't just be a policy change. And so that's a little difficult. The annual appropriations process is an opportunity where you can make some of these changes. No such funds should be used for, and you can direct agencies' action that way. We now have President Trump's appointees running these agencies, so we'll have better partners to work with. There's also an opportunity for Congress to repeal rules that ATF and others may have put in place. So we're looking at all of these things, all the above, but also with the Chevron court decision. Chevron basically, it was this idiotic court decision that said when there's a difference of opinion on what the intent of Congress was, don't listen to Congress, listen to the bureaucrats. That's what it was, idiotic, but it's been in place for a long time, and so the executive agencies have run roughshod over the people. That was reversed, and so now we're looking at all kinds of decisions that we can go back and correct now that that's been corrected. And so there are a number of opportunities to do this by working with the agencies, by directing the agencies through the appropriations process. We're asking the questions and really looking at anything we can put in reconciliation that would be legal. All options are out there. In the meantime, you'll have standalone legislation, and we'll try to educate our colleagues about those, and then look for those opportunities. There's always deal making that goes on in Congress, and I'm always looking for an opportunity to get some of our good policies attached to something else. So it's kind of an all of the above strategy.
Okay. And then just a final question here for you. We appreciate you taking the time to do this with us, but, certainly the parties have now kind of coalesced on either side of this issue pretty clearly, right? And this last election was no different, especially at the presidential level between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, where it was fairly obvious which side wanted more gun restrictions and which side advocated for, fewer of them. And at the same time, though, we have seen a tendency, especially the first Trump administration, we have a record to go off of. And after major mass shootings, there was a tendency from the president to, embrace potential new restrictions. And in fact, he did institute the bump stock ban after the Las Vegas shooting, which has since been overturned by the Supreme Court. But and then beyond Trump himself, the Republican Party was on board with the 2022 Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. You had 17 Republicans vote for that, which included things like, the enhanced background check for 18 to 20-year-olds buying guns that made the process longer than an instant check, and new restrictions or new groups of people added to the prohibited persons list, specifically domestic or people, the boyfriend loophole was closed. People who had committed domestic violence but weren't technically, married or related to the person, that they were added to the prohibited persons list, among a number of other initiatives like school security funding. What would you say to some of the gun rights critics of the Republican Party? Either how would you reassure, I guess, some of them about the next major mass shooting happens, that the Republican Party won't get involved in compromise on this issue? That's what a lot of your hardcore gun rights activists are concerned about, for sure.
Yeah, it is a concern because, when you see a mass shooting now with 24-hour news, you're transformed to that community. It doesn't have to be in your community for you to really be impacted by it. It's horrific. I'm a father. Anytime I think about a shooting in a school, my gosh, I get sick on my stomach, and I just can't imagine how those parents feel. I mean, it's horrific. And so any normal human being, when you see something like that and you experience it, you want to say, how do we make sure that doesn't happen again? And so there's that normal human reaction. And I recognize that. And I've also believed, as one of the leaders on Second Amendment in Congress, I have a responsibility to have an answer. What is the answer to school shootings and this kind of violence we've seen in this country? And so it's something I've spent a lot of time studying and a lot of time working on. I was able to get the Stop School Violence Act signed into law when President Trump was in office last time, sweeping legislation that gave money to schools to harden the schools. It gave money for law enforcement to train anti-school shooter training, increased money for guidance counselors. And because to me, that's how you really stop a school shooting. And I introduced a legislation since then, Stop School Violence 2, which put more money into those important resources. And it boils down to, my sister was a guidance counselor in public schools, still is. And you could go to any school in America and ask any student or any teacher, who are the troubled kids at this school? And they could tell you. They could tell you off the top of their head. We know who these troubled youth are, but we're not doing anything to help them. My sister's a guidance counselor. She said, I have about 30 minutes a year per student that I can spend with them. When you take out the testing things I have to do and all the other things, I just don't have the time to spend with all the students that I need to spend with them. And so that was the thought behind the Stop School Violence Act, is let's put more resources behind guidance counselors. If you had an extra guidance counselor in every school whose job was to deal with troubled youth at that school. Imagine in the El Paso shooting, horrific shooting in El Paso, Texas. That was a kid who dropped out of school. What if we'd intervened with that kid before he dropped out of school? We could have made a generational change in the life of that kid, and then we wouldn't have had that shooting. And so I think society has really failed because it's hard. It's easy to say ban guns, but it's really hard to say, how do we go in there and actually get to the root causes of why this violence is happening? And to me, the root cause is you've got really troubled young people who are acting out and not being intervened with by folks. And remember the Florida school shooter who'd had 15 interactions with law enforcement. Had all these red flags, and no one had really done anything about it. And so that's where my work has really been focused. And the Senate gun bill that you mentioned, I opposed it. It had red flag laws. It had a lot of things in it that I thought were bad policy. That would restrict the rights of law-abiding gun owners. But they actually took the language from my bill, Stop School Violence Act 2, when it came to adding guidance counselors and adding resources to schools to harden the schools. And, a lot of that language came from my bill. And I was pleased to have them steal it, the language. I didn't have a problem with that. But, those kind of solutions are actually what we need to focus on. If you banned all guns, there's still millions of guns out there. You're not going to take them away. What's going to happen is the only people with guns will be the people that break the law in the first place. And it would not stop these shootings. But what would stop it is if we could go into every school in America and help every troubled kid before they got to the breaking point. That would stop school shootings. And
that has been the debate going here for a while now, especially on school shootings, between adding more gun restrictions versus focusing more on mental health. I suppose you can only speak for yourself in this circumstance, obviously, but, under a Republican Congress with a Republican president, I know a lot of people are in the gun rights community are asking, can they trust that that you'll focus on that mental health component instead of gun restrictions if this, and hopefully it doesn't, but if it inevitably does come back up again as a major hot topic, that there, can you offer any assurances, I guess, maybe even just for yourself?
Well, sure. You can look at my track record. I've been a leader on this from the beginning. I've been very out front, very bold. When we've had these national incidents, I've written memos for my colleagues to help them understand these issues and how to talk about these issues. And, I'll continue to do that. When we had the El Paso and Dayton shootings at the same time, I think I'm equating two different ones. Yeah. So
no, that was,
El Paso and Dayton were at the same time. I was talking about El Paso earlier, but I was actually talking about the other Texas shooting. But when those both happened at the same time, President Trump met with those families and he said, well, we need to do something. I got on the phone with the president and reminded him, you've done more than any president in American history because you've signed the NICS fix. which closed a loophole of information going into the system. And you signed the Stop School Violence Act that put resources in hardening schools and these other things. You've actually done more than any president. And let's talk about what we can do that'll actually make a difference. So we'll continue to try to shape policy in that direction and remind people that and even when we're really emotional and we're upset and we think this shouldn't happen again, let's focus on what will actually have an impact. I think shame on us as policymakers if we just do the quick, easy thing and say, oh, we're going to ban something and now we've fixed it. Because there will be another school shooting in America because we have a lot of troubled kids out there that are not getting help. And we got a lot of schools that aren't hardened like they ought to be. It's response, and frankly, it's not Congress's responsibility. It's really a state and local responsibility. But I think it's important for us to lead on this, and we'll continue to do that.
That'll be your position regardless of what pressure you see from media or Donald Trump or Elon. Not that this will happen, but Speaker Johnson, anybody, doesn't matter. You're going to stick to this position.
Yeah, and you can believe me because you can look at 12 years of track record on that.
Okay. All right. Well, look, we appreciate you coming on. I know you got a busy day, so thank you for giving us some time to go over these things and answer some pretty detailed questions, policy questions here. And I appreciate you giving us some insight because, as I said, you are one of the people in the Republican caucus in the House that leads on this issue. So, I'm glad that you gave us an opportunity to speak.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you, Stephen. I appreciate the seriousness with which you take these issues and the way you highlight them for folks and make it easy to understand. You do a tremendous job and appreciate all you do.
Thank you. And if people want to follow your activity on this stuff, where can they do that?
Well, richardhudson.org is my campaign website. Got bio and information there. And then hudson.house.gov, hudson.house.gov. We'll have a lot of the policy information and you can follow the legislation we're working on there.
All right. Wonderful. Well, that's all we've got for you guys this week. We will speak to you again real soon.